Okay, so the series of webinars that we're looking at is called Creating a Work Tracker in Excel, and this is the second part in that series, and it's called Adding Functions and Analysis. The idea of these 3 sessions is that by the end of the 3 sessions, we will have a fully functioning work tracker, so a table where we can enter raw data, and we'll also have a live dashboard as well that we'll be able to view, and you can see a screenshot there of what it's going to look like. Last week, we created the worksheets. So we talked about how we'd create new worksheets, how we'd name those worksheets, and we planned the general structure of how our Excel file was going to look. We did also talk a little bit about whether using Excel for this type of work is appropriate, and kind of what we were hoping to gain out of it. And we discussed how if we're working within a small team and we just want something quite quick and easy to use to track our tasks, having a document like this, a file like this, and the ability to co-author on that can be quite useful. We will touch more around that topic in the next session, which is in a few weeks' time, and we'll look at maybe other options that we have for recording this sort of work. But for the moment, we're sticking in Excel. So we added the worksheets, we created the table. So we talked a lot about the different columns, we talked about number formatting, cell formatting, and we also talked about the benefits of converting that raw data into a table, and adding the ability of things like sorting, filters, and things like that as well. We then talked quite a lot about data validation. So whenever you've got a workbook where you are expecting other users to enter in data, and you want to obviously make sure that we reduce the risk of errors as much as possible. It's a bit like if you're filling in a form online and it asks you for a date, for example. If you put in something that isn't a date, it will throw up an error message. So very, very similar in Excel. You can create data validation on things like your date cells. So you can say, it must be a date between these 2 days, or on your number cells, you can say it must be a whole number, or it must be less than 10. And also data validation allows you to create drop-down lists too. So for some of our columns like work type and priority, we popped some options on another worksheet, and then we linked to those in our drop down so that users had to choose from one of those choices. And obviously, if they tried to type in their own data, it would throw up an error message. And we looked at those error messages as well, how we could play around with those, how we could change the message that was shown, and also how there were options where we could provide more of a warning message. And then if the individual enters data that doesn't conform with that data validation, there is an option to accept that data. So there was a few options around that. We then started looking at some very basic formulas. We didn't get too much into function and formula because we'll look at that today, but I believe we just looked at adding just a basic sum function at the bottom of the table, just if we had any data that we wanted to total. And I think we kind of added in like an average as well, but we removed those in the end because it's not something that we're going to move forward with. We're going to be looking at more into functions in this session. So what are we looking at doing today? We're going to look at XLOOKUP, which is still one of the most common functions that I get asked about, because it can be used in so many situations. It may be that you're used to using VLOOKUP. So XLOOKUP was only introduced a few years ago. It's a fairly recent function. If you're still using VLOOKUP, prepare hopefully to be amazed in the XLOOKUP. It's so much easier to use, and it's in terms of formatting data and not having to kind of change the data in the way it's laid out. It's a lot more easier to get the results. So we're going to use that actually to assist with data entry, but obviously it can be used in a lot of different situations. We are going to look at some more functions, so we're not going to go kind of into really, really advanced functions, but we're going to kind of move beyond sum and things like that. And we're going to look at COUNTIF and COUNTIFs and SUMIF and SUMIFs, because these can be really useful when you're just want a quick analysis of some raw data in terms of counting particular categories or information and adding up particular like data that meets a set criteria as well. And then after that, we're going to look at some visual aids. Obviously, what we have at the minute is a table. It's not too large at the minute, but it's obviously going to get bigger the more people add data to it. And looking at that amount of information, it's really, really hard to just pick information out just by using your eyes alone and no formatting. So things like, I really want to see, which tasks are overdue, or I want to see which tasks are due this week. So maybe using some formatting, some highlighting, and things like that will help us see that data a little bit more clearly. So without further ado, we will open up our table. I have added in some more rows than what we had last week. So this is our data entry table here. Remember, we also added some slices last week as well that helps with our filtering. We've got our lookups worksheet. So this is the one that is pulling through into our drop downs. So for example, into our work type, we can select from the drop downs here. We will hide the lookups worksheets next week, so that's not going to be visible obviously to end users. And we've got our I've added a little bit more in, but it was a very empty looking dashboard, which is where we're going to have our dashboard and our graphs and things like that. I'll talk about what these are in a moment. So first thing I wanted to look at was XLOOKUP. Now the reason for this is because I want to add in another column. So I'm going to add it in to here. So I'm just going to right click on column E and I'll just click insert and I'll just rename it. I'm going to rename it category. Now this is going to help me when I'm producing my dashboard and my analysis. Is I want to categorize each of these work types. So for example, if it's a video, I want to categorize it as training material, and if it's things like a training course, I want to categorize it as training delivery. First thing is, I've just noticed that because I've inserted a new column, it's copied across the data validation that I have in the previous column, which we don't want. So I'm just going to select those cells, and we looked at this last week. I'm just going to pop into data. Here's our data validation in here, and I'm just going to get clear and click OK. There we go. So there's normal cells in here now. So what I could do, I don't have to use XLOOKUP at all. I could say, well, people have to do it manually. So if it's a video, they have to manually type in training resource, or again, maybe have a drop down. But if I say, well, actually, whenever it's a video, it's always going to be training resource. And whenever it's a training course, it's always going to say training delivery. What I could use instead is XLOOKUP, and that will be able to look for the work type within a table and automatically return the correct category. So I'm actually just going to create a separate worksheet just to keep it separate from our lookups for now so we don't get confused. And I'm just going to call that new worksheet. So I've just double clicked on the name. I'm going to call it XLOOKUP just so we know what it is. Obviously, eventually we can hide this from the end user. I'm going to put in here my work types. So work type, which was... I'm just going to copy and paste them from my lookups, actually. That's probably the easiest thing to do. So training course, user guides, videos, and training admin. So I'll just paste those in there. And I'm also again going to put my categories here. So category. And we're going to say training course is, let's just put delivery, materials, and then maybe I'll just have an admin category. Okay. So this is the table that my XLOOKUP is going to be referencing. So essentially, whenever someone puts a work type into here, it will look in this column, it will find the work type that they've selected, and it will pull through the related category into this column. Okay, so we're going to put our XLOOKUP into this category column here. Now, when we're looking at our functions today, we're going to see that there's two different methods of entering functions into Excel. If you're confident with functions, we can simply type them into the cell. So we'd always start with an equal sign. So equal sign into an Excel cell is telling Excel that we're going to be performing some kind of calculation. If we don't put an equal sign in, nothing's going to happen. We would then type in the name of the function that we're going to be using. So I would type in XLOOKUP. You'll notice when I start typing that the name of the function appears underneath. So it's almost searching as I type, and I can either continue typing or I can press the tab key or double click on the result. and that would automatically select that function for me. It also adds in an open bracket. So if we were typing it in, we would have to type that open bracket. And we can then see underneath in this kind of screen tip that appears, the different elements that are going to form that function. Okay, if we use a simple function such as sum and we put an open bracket, all it's looking for is the numbers that it's going to add up, the numbers or the cell references. But if we're looking at something a bit more complex, like an XLOOKUP, you can see that there's quite a few different things that can be included within an XLOOKUP function. Now, some of these things, so these three at the end here, are actually contained within square brackets, and that means that those are optional. Okay, so I don't have to fill in an if not found, a match mode, and a search mode. I could just do the first three. As I move through and I start filling these in, it will show me which part of the function I'm up to by highlighting it in bold. So at the moment, it's looking for our lookup value. Once I've input the lookup value and I've entered a comma, the lookup array would be bold. So it's telling me at each point what it's looking for within that part of the function. So that's one way of entering it, and we'll type it in a moment, but I just want to show you another option. The other option, and this is quite good if you're not as confident with the function, is to use a tool called insert function. So I still click on the cell where I want to insert the function, and instead of typing it, I would click on this icon here of the FX just next to our formula bar. When I hover over it, it says insert function. So I'll click on that one, and this dialog box is just asking me which function do you want to use, and your recent functions will be shown here, or alternatively, if it's not listed, you can type it into this search box and click go, and it would display underneath, and I can click OK. Now, this time, rather than me seeing kind of the parts of the function in like that screen tip underneath the cell when I was typing it in, now I can see them listed here on the left side. Any mandatory parts, any mandatory fields are bold, and those three optional ones that before we had in square brackets, we can see here, and then not in bold, so we can see that they're optional. The other advantage of doing it this way, so as well as kind of a lot of people just find it a bit easier to look at rather than kind of typing in and looking at that screen tip underneath, it's a little bit clearer, it's a little bit more spread out. The other advantage is when you click in each of these fields, Excel actually provides a description of what it's looking for. I'll be honest, sometimes the descriptions, they aren't always, you don't always look at it and think, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes you read the description and you think, I still don't fully understand what that means. But sometimes it can just help jog your memory by doing it through here and looking at the options underneath. Okay, so we'll do it this way to start with, and then afterwards I'll type it in just so you can see how it works both ways. You can see also that it's already put in the function for me, so equals XLOOKUP, and we've got the open brackets and close brackets, and what I fill in here will automatically go into those brackets. So the lookup value, when I click in this field, it says is the value to search for. Now we're just looking at this first row to start with. I'm not going to worry about the rest of my rows underneath. I'm going to click in this cell here, D4, because what we're looking up is whatever they've typed or whatever they've selected as the work type. Okay, so it's looking up the work type, and it also tells me here what it's returned, which is also quite useful as well to see, oh yeah, this video, so that's correct. Lookup array is the array or range to search. Now that's actually in my other worksheet, in my XLOOKUP worksheet. So I'm going to click on XLOOKUP, and I'm going to select the various work types. So this is the value that it's going to be searching for. So it's looking for videos in this list here, and we can see it's returning this list on the right hand side. The return array is the array or range to return. So again, I'm going to pop into my XLOOKUP sheet, and this time I'm going to select these cells here. So this one is the cells that it's returning. So it's looking them up within column A, and it's then returning them from within column B. These ones underneath are optional, like I mentioned. We are going to use this one. We're not going to worry about match mode or search mode today. If not found is quite useful. So if not found wasn't included in VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP if you use HLOOKUP. So essentially what it does is if it can't find what we're looking for, so if it couldn't find videos, for example, in this list, what is it going to return? If you're using a traditional VLOOKUP, it would just return an error, which isn't particularly user-friendly, or you could include a VLOOKUP within an if function or an if error function, and you could kind of put your own message in there. But HLOOKUP has made that a lot bit easier because we can actually type into this cell exactly what we want the cell to produce if it can't find the item that it's searching for. So I could put something like work type not found. Okay, if I click OK, it will pop. Oh, hopefully. Why that's not going into that. That's very weird. There we go. So we pressed enter and it's inserted the function into here, and it's also automatically copied it down into the rows underneath. Now you will notice that that work type not found is appearing in all of these, even though training course it should be able to find it. Okay, user guide and so on, it should be able to find. Now this is where we're going to look at kind of another thing that was on the agenda for today, which is cell references and how we're referencing cells in our functions, particularly when we're copying functions down to the rows underneath. So if we have a look, this is the function that was inserted for me. This is my XLOOKUP function here. So it's looking up the work type, and it's looking up the work type within the cells A2 to A5, and it's returning the work type from B2 to B5, and that one worked absolutely fine. If I click on the cell underneath, you'll notice that these references have changed. Okay. So this one says it's looking up training course in A3 to A6, and it's returning the results from B3 to B6. And this one says A4 to A7, B4 to B7, and so on. So what's happened is, if I look at this one, for example, and I can double click on this function, and it will show me the cells that it's referencing. There we go. You can see that it's looking at the training course in there, so that's correct. But in here, it's looking at A3 to A6 and B3 to B6. So when you copy functions down, the cell references also move down as well. So the reasons why these haven't been found is because they've got the incorrect reference in the functions. It needs to always be A2 to A5 and B2 to B5. Okay. Now, in order to correct that, we need to make these references absolute or fixed, okay? And we do that using $. And you might have seen $signs in Excel references before. So essentially, if we have a $sign before the A, before the column letter, it fixes the column. And if we have a $sign before the row number, it fixes the row. And if we have it before both of them, it fixes that cell. Okay, so what we need to do is make sure that these are always fixed to A2 and A5. Now, a quick way of adding in that fixed or absolute referencing is to use F4. So you can click on the cell reference and press F4. I can click in here and press F4. Okay, I could have done this within that dialog box as well that we had a minute ago. The same thing. So this is just meaning always look in A2 and A5 and always return from B2 to B5. And if I press enter now, you'll notice suddenly we haven't got the error anymore. And when I'm clicking through, you'll notice that these references are fixed. Okay. Another way around that, I wanted to do it like that just to kind of illustrate the point, but another way around that would be that you could have formatted this data as a table, and then when you're referencing it, it would reference the whole table and you wouldn't have an issue with cell references. But if you are referencing particular cells, it's really important to remember your fixed references, your absolute references, if you're receiving any errors. Okay, and you'll notice that as with all functions, they're going to automatically update when I change any of the information. So if I change this to training admin, for example, you'll notice that the category automatically changes. Okay, so we're making this a little bit easier for someone that's going to come in and add in any information. If I had typed in the function, just to show you very quickly what it would look like if it was typed. So we go equals XLOOKUP, we'd press tab to pull that function in. The lookup value, we're just clicking on the cell, or you can type in the cell reference, comma, and when I've typed in the comma, it moves to the next part. The lookup array is these cells here, so I'm just clicking on the worksheet and selecting the cells, comma, it's now looking for the return array, which is this one, and then comma, and then I will put in the if not found, just so we have a nice text kind of message there rather than kind of an error. The one difference if you're typing your functions is a lot of the time if you're entering any text, particularly text to display, we need to type this in speech marks. Whereas when we entered it into the dialog box, the insert function dialog box, we didn't have to worry about speech marks. So we could put work type not found. And obviously, remembering that we need those fixed. So F4, 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 and then enter. Okay, so same result. But like I said, a lot of people that are new to a function, they do like to use insert function. But once you get used to it, it can be a little bit quicker to type out. Okay. So that's an example of XLOOKUP. Some of the other functions I want to look at today to gain kind of a bit more of kind of analysis of my raw data, I'm going to put into this dashboard worksheet. Now, eventually the dashboard worksheet, we're going to format it really nicely, have some colors and things like that. We're going to worry about that next time. For now, we're just going to do the analysis. The first thing I want to do is just calculate the number of tasks. How many tasks do we have? Okay, so again, for this one, if I wanted to, I could use insert function, or I could just type it in. This one's a fairly simple function, so I'm just going to type it in. So I'll type equals, and the function for this one is called COUNTA, and you'll notice when you are hovering over it, or when it's selected, it gives you a description of the function as well, which is quite useful for COUNTA because you can see there's quite a lot of different count options. But COUNTA counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So it doesn't matter if they're a number or text, as long as the cell isn't empty, then it's counted. Okay, so we'll put COUNTA and open our bracket. And all it's looking for in this function is those cells that we want to count. So I'm going to click back on my work log worksheet. It doesn't really matter too much which column we want to select in here, as long as it's a column that users are always going to be completing. So not assigned to, because maybe if something hasn't been assigned yet, it's going to be empty. But something like ID number or task, we'll just select that column, and you'll notice when I'm selecting that column, because I've formatted as a table, it is automatically selecting whatever is in that table. So if that table was to get larger or smaller, so if I was to add additional rows, for example, it would automatically include those additional rows within my function, rather than having to worry about cell references like we did for our XLOOKUP. And then all I need to do is close the bracket, press enter, and it's telling us we have 13 tasks. And again, that number will automatically update if we're adding or removing any new rows. This one underneath is a little bit more complicated. So for this one here, I want to calculate how many tasks have been completed. So in my work log, I want Excel to look at this table, and I want it to count how many tasks have been completed. So it's going to move down this column, and each time it sees complete, it's going to count those. So this one's going to be a slightly different function. So again, we can type it in, or we can use our insert function button. I'll use insert function for this one because it's got a couple more parts to it, so it's going to be a little bit easier to see. So I'll click insert function, and the function I need for this one is called COUNTIF. Okay, so it counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. So the number of cells in that status range that meet the condition of complete. So I'll click OK. And the first thing we need to input is the range. So go back to my work log and I'm going to select that column like that. Okay, and again, you'll see that it selected the whole of that column and it's also given me kind of the items in that column as well. And then we need the criteria. So I'll click on this criteria and I just need to type in the criteria that I want so to count. So I'll type in complete, click OK. Oh, I don't know what's happening with this box today. For some reason, whenever I click OK, it just there we go. Press enter and we've got 4 completed tasks. And again, like I said, you know, if we went in and completed another one, then that number would automatically update for us, which is really going to be imperative for our live dashboard that people are going to be looking at. This one here underneath, I want to kind of use these 2 values and just work out what percentage of tasks have we completed. So this isn't going to be a function, it's just going to be a simple calculation to work out the percentage. So I'm just going to type it in. So it's just going to be equals, and then I'm just going to click on the cells. So completed tasks divided, so divided in Excel is that / by the number of total tasks. Press enter, and we have our result. Now, I want it to show as a percentage, so kind of moving back to what we talked about last week, in the Home tab, we've got our number formats in here. So last week we looked at things like dates and things like that, but now we're going to look at our percentage. So we'll select the cell, click %, and you can see it's 38%. If I wanted it to show, you know, more decimal places, for example, I can use this icon here and we can increase the decimal places and decrease them. Okay, I think we'll just leave it as 38%. Okay, few more kind of analysis I want to do over here. So this first one, I probably will change the naming of these, but I wanted to make it quite clear what I was trying to work out. Is I want to count the number of high priority tasks that have not yet been started, because I really want to know, you know, how many high priority tasks are there that we haven't even looked at yet. Hopefully 0, but we'll go in and have a look. So for this one, we are counting, so we know it's going to be some kind of count function. Whereas with the completed tasks, all we were doing was we were going in, we were looking at this column, and every time we saw the word complete, we were counting it. With this one, we're not just looking at one criteria, we're looking at 2. We want to look at high priority tasks and we want to look at the tasks that have not been started. So we want to look down the priority list, find those at high, and we also want to move across here and count those that are high and that have not yet been started. So we can't use COUNTIF for this one. Instead, we will use COUNTIFs. It's simply COUNTIF with an S on the end. So for COUNTIFs, it allows us to put in multiple criteria. So it's not just one like COUNTIF, we can have multiple criteria. I think it's up to about 52 or something you can have. So you can have lots of criteria if you wanted to. So I'll click OK. And the criteria range, so it says criteria 1 range and criteria 1. So the first one is simply the range for that first criteria. So our first criteria is that we're looking for high priority. So the range, if I go to my work log, is this priority column. And the criteria for that range is high. Okay, so it's looking in that column and it's finding any that are high. You'll notice that now I've filled in my kind of first range and first criteria, it's given me criteria range 2. And you'll also notice it's not in bold. So in theory, we could stop there, but we're going to add in our second criteria range. So our second criteria is that the task status is not started. So the range for that one, if I click in there and I go back to here, is the status, so I'll select that column, and the criteria 2 is not started. Okay, and we're going to leave it at that. Obviously, like you can see, again, it's now added in number 3. We could go, oh, there we go, we've got lots of them down here that we could go, oh, it must be more than 50. Maybe they've maybe 50 is an older number for a few years ago. Maybe they've added in some more, but we've just got those 2. So priority is high, status is not started. We'll click OK. I don't know what's happening with this box today. It's very strange that when I click OK, it's just, I don't know if it's my mouse. Oh, it's just slowly disappearing off the edge of the screen. Oh, cancel. Oh dear, now I've lost it. Right, I'm going to type it in to avoid the issue with the box. Then you'll get to see an example of it being typed. So equals COUNTIFs, open bracket, criteria range is the priority, comma. The first criterion, remember now we're typing, we need to type in those speech marks, is high, comma, criteria range 2 is this column here, comma, and the criteria of that column is not started. And the speech marks, close the brackets, enter. Okay, and we have 1. Okay, so we have 1 high priority task that's not yet been started. These next 2 are going to be slightly different. So for this one here, I want to look at, so we've got a column called estimated hours, which is this one, which is essentially the number of hours we think it's going to take to carry out each of these pieces of work. So in this cell here, I want to look at the estimated hours that we have, I think we have remaining. So I don't want to include any tasks that have been completed. I just want to look at the tasks that are, not yet started or they're in progress and work out how many hours of work we think that we currently have to go. So for this one, we're not counting. We're not counting, each instance. We're actually totaling or adding up those number of estimated hours. So it's not going to be a count function. It's going to be a sum function. So I'm going to type equals. And the sum function we need is SUMIF. So very similar to COUNTIF. So COUNTIF, we were counting numbers or items that met a particular criteria. With SUMIF, we are adding up numbers where those rows meet a particular criteria. Okay, so equals SUMIF, open brackets. Now SUMIF, it's got kind of an extra part. With COUNTIF, we were just looking at a range of cells, normally a column, and then we were specifying what the criteria was. So if it says complete, for example, it will count those. With SUMIF, you'll notice we still have the range, we still have the criteria, but then an optional part of the function is something called the sum range. Now the reason we have this is because it might be that the criteria and that kind of the column we're looking at for our criteria is different to the column that we're looking at that we're going to actually total the numbers, and that's going to be the case in this instance. So our range for our criteria is the status. It's going to be not completed. So I'll go in and select my status and I'll put a comma. The criteria, now this is going to be slightly different as well. The criteria, we just want to include anything that is either in progress or not started. So as long as it's not completed. So I'm going to use my speech marks and I'm going to use these icons here, which means that it's not. So not completed. Okay, so anything in that column, as long as it's not completed, it will be kind of selected and looked at. Then I will use the sum range because we're not totaling up, we're not summing anything in this column. We're totaling up numbers in a separate column. So our range is our estimated hours here. Okay, so it's looking down here, it's finding anything that doesn't say completed, and then when it finds something, it's moving across to this row, this column, and it's adding up the numbers that meet that criteria. So it's a little bit different to COUNTIF. So we've got 32 hours, 32 estimated hours of work that is not yet been completed. This final one here, hours spent on completed user guides. So again, we are looking at some kind of sum function because I want to total up the number of hours. This time we're going to be looking at the actual hours. So this one here, so when something's been completed, the individual will type in like how many hours it actually took. So the actual hours spent on user guides, and also the status is completed. Okay, so it's going to be a sum, but because we have more than one criteria rather than a SUMIF, it's going to be SUMIFs. Okay, so similar to COUNTIFs, it's going to be SUMIFs. Do I try using my insert function? I'll try it. So insert function, we'll do SUMIFs, go, and then we'll select it, click OK. Okay, so very much like our COUNTIF, once we've put in the first one, it's going to give us additional ones that we can fill in. Our sum range, it says, are the actual cells to sum. So if I go to my work log, the actual cells to sum is going to be this actual hours column. And our criteria range for our first criteria is that the user guides or the status is completed. So our range is our status, and our criteria is complete. And you can see it's added in a second range now. So our second range is going to be the type of work, which is our work type column, and our criteria is going to be user guide. Okay, so it's looking, it's finding anything that's a user guide and it's complete. And if it finds a match, it's moving across to that hours column and it's totaling up the number of hours. Oh, it's doing it again. I don't know why. I have never seen this before. It's very strange. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so hours spent on completed user guides too. And again, all of these functions are going to update. The results of those are going to update automatically as we're adding items. If we're editing items as well, we will format this a little bit more in a more visually appealing way in the next webinar. Okay, so we've got some nice analysis in there to start with. We will look at visual, a few things on kind of visual, the way things look. Next, I added a new column, so let's just pop those over there because it just moves a little bit. There are different options of when we're looking at kind of visual formatting. So we'll next time in next webinar, we'll look at like graphs and things like that, pivot tables that we'll have on our dashboard. But what I want to look at is just how we can edit this worksheet, how we can make this table just a little bit easy to see, a little bit easy to quickly understand without having to look into each individual cell. Now, that's going to be done using conditional formatting. Okay, so conditional formatting allows us to change the formats of the cell based on the value or the text, the contents of that cell. One of the most common ones is just highlighting cell rules. So for example, if we have our days remaining, so let's say if the days remaining is less than 0, so -1 and so on, then we want it to show as red because that task is now overdue. So what I would do is I'd select my column, conditional formatting, we're highlighting cell rules, so essentially we're highlighting the cell based on the contents, and you can see we've got lots of different options in here. So greater than, less than, between, equal to. We've got one for text, so if you just want to highlight something with particular text, so highlight all the user guides, for example. We can have dates, which we'll look at in a minute. You can also highlight duplicate values, so if a number appears more than once or text that appears more than once, it would highlight it for you. We'll use less than, and we'll type in here less than 0, and we can then choose the formatting. So we can have, you know, light red fill, we can have a yellow fill, we can have a green fill. If you can't see the one that you want, you can create a custom format. So you can choose, you know, exactly the fill color, the number, the font, and so on. But we'll go with red because if it's overdue, it needs to be red. So we'll click OK. And again, conditional formatting automatically updates. So if I changed my due date for this one to yesterday, 5th of May 26, then obviously it's overdue -1 and it's automatically reformatted. Now straight away now, someone opening this and looking at this, it's really, really clear to see which tasks are overdue. The filters, particularly with things like dates, if I look at due dates, so I'm just going to select this one and I'll go into conditional formatting, highlight sales rules. When we look at date occurring, the drop down here is quite nice. It's not just, you know, it occurs between the 1st of April and the 31st of May or whatever you're looking at. You can actually say it occurs this week or last week or today. So for example, we could say, right, anything where the due date is this week, we're going to fill it in yellow, for example, and we can click OK. All right, so that again, obviously if I open it next week, the week after, those fill colors are going to move to different cells depending on the date. So there's lots of conditional formatting options, like I said, particularly with the highlight cell rules. With the top bottom rules, just to show, it's not particularly relevant for this particular spreadsheet, but just to show you what these would look like. So it's highlighting, for example, the top 10 items or the top 10%, or those items that are above average or below average. Actually, I do have, this is just a slightly different table. This is for sales data, so this is more of a financial tracker. So we've got a lot more numbers and things on here. So I could say, for example, in this total amount where people are recording their individual sales, we just want to kind of highlight maybe the top, I don't know, 5% and show them with green. So it's a top 5% sale. Okay, so it's great for numbers. We also have data bars. So it's almost like creating like a miniature graph within the data. Very quick to do, again, completely dynamic, and it's also going to apply to any new rows in our table as well. So that's just immediately allowing us to say, right, that's a really large number, that's a slightly smaller number. It's just another way of doing it, and there's a few different kind of colors and formatting options. Data scales, so similar idea, it uses kind of shading. For me, that doesn't look as easy to see, but it's using that idea of shading. So for that one, it's the larger numbers, it's yellow, and the lower numbers, it's more of a dark green. And icon sets, which again, for me, my eyes, that doesn't really isn't really as easy for me to see or easily make out. But the idea of, again, flags for different values, and you can set the values, you know, so you can say put a red flag if it's less than 200, a green flag if it's over 1,000, and you can change the values of those. The other option we have is to set up a new rule. So one of the kind of common queries that I get with conditional formatting is they say, okay, that's fine, that we can just select a single row or a single column and it would just format the cells within that row, within that column. But actually, what if I want to apply conditional formatting across a whole row? So for example, in our status column, let's say for each item that is complete, I want the whole row to turn grey. Grey out the whole row, so it's really easy to see that, you know, we don't need to worry about that particular one anymore, because normally if you're just looking at the values in here like we've done with these ones, the conditional formatting would only display within that selected column. Now, it is possible, so what I'll do is I'll select the whole of the table and I'll go to conditional formatting, and we're going to create a new rule, because we're going to actually need like a formula to go in and set this up. So we'll set new rule, And this is where you can go in and kind of set up any more complicated conditional formatting. So if you want to just set particular values for highest values or lowest values. But the one I'm going to use is this one at the bottom, which is use a formula to determine which cells to format. Now, what I'm going to put in here is equals, and then we're going to be looking at the status column here. So I'm going to put in, I'm going to use the $, and I'm going to put in G. So it's always going to be looking at column G. So even when we're applying this across the whole table, it's going to be focused on that single column. And then I'm going to put in 4, because that is the first value. I'm not going to put in a $sign before the 4, because I want it to move down the rows and to look at each row in turn. Okay, so I'm not going to fix that for that row number. I'm only fixing the column. I'm then going to put equals, and then in speech marks, I'm going to put in the status that I'm looking for, which is complete. And I'm also going to set the format. You'll notice at the minute it's no format set, so I'll click format, and I'm just going to do like a light grey fill. We can still see the contents of the cells, but click OK, and then OK, and you'll notice there that each of those rows which are complete, and obviously again it will update automatically, is formatted in grey. Now I will give you a word of warning with this, because it looks good, and it's obviously very handy to have that formatting pulled across the whole of the row. However, I would just say, because I've seen this used in real life, is if you have got this set up, just be careful, particularly with copying and pasting data. If you're creating a new row and you're copying data from somewhere else, say maybe like I'm copying like the training admin or copying the task, whatever it is, sometimes that conditional formatting can be lost, and you might notice that when you're adding new rows, it's not applying that shading correctly. Okay, that only applies to those rows. The normal conditional formatting is fine, but kind of just a little bit of a drawback with Excel with those conditional formatting across the whole rows is, yeah, just be careful when you're copying and pasting, because sometimes it can lose those cell references. There is a final thing I will show you, and again I'll just pop back to my sales data. It's just another example of kind of graphics that you can add, or like visual cues that you can add to this worksheet rather than your actual dashboard, and that's something called a sparkline. Now, if I go to insert, we can find the sparklines here. So they're right next to the normal chart. So obviously with the normal chart, you've got to select your data. It's going to give you a whole kind of object that you can move around and resize, almost like an image. With these sparklines, they actually sit within a single cell. Now I've moved across to this sales data because probably not really applicable to a work tracker, but they're particularly good at looking at data over time, particularly with the line sparkline. So if, for example, I've got my total sales amounts in here, they're in chronological order, but the first one is at the top and so on. And I could insert a sparkline just at the bottom of this column here, and that's going to show really just quick, very, very basic line chart of how my sales are changing over time. Are they going up? Are they going down? So I'll click in the cell, just a single cell where we display our sparkline. I'll click on the sparkline that I want, and that is line, and it will ask me which data I want to look at. So I could put my sparkline somewhere else, but I'm just going to put it there because it's easy to see, and I'll just select my data range, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so it is, like I said, it is very, very basic. We're not going to get things with the charts like, the axis labels and everything like that, the grid lines, but it sits within the cell. Again, it's dynamic. So, if anything changes, you can see the points changing on the chart. And the only way to resize that is to actually resize the cell itself. So if I did that, for example, then it's just going to resize the sparkline. So you've got the line sparkline, you've also got like a column sparkline, which gives you if I just do it here, gives you like a bar chart, column chart. And not relevant for this one, but you have a win-loss. So if it was a positive number, it would appear like those blue ones up there, so like a win, a positive, and if it was a negative number, it would appear as a loss, or as a red one kind of below that central line. Whenever you insert a sparkline and you've selected that cell with the sparkline inside it, it will give you an additional sparkline tab for any formatting, so you can quickly switch the type. Obviously my win-loss, they're all above 0, so that's why it's not particularly useful. You can add little kind of dots to it, or if it's a column chart, you can change the colours of particular columns. So you can highlight the high point, so that's just straight away telling me, you know, our highest sale was kind of more back towards the beginning of the sales. We can highlight the low points, any negatives, the first point, the last point, or all of the markers, and we can obviously change, you know, the style and the colours and things like that as well. So there's little things you can do with it, just not as in depth, but again, just another option if we wanted just some visual formatting on that kind of raw data table to make it a little bit more visible. Okay, that is everything. So next time, which I believe is in 3 weeks, is our final Excel session, and that's where we're actually going to format that dashboard. So we're going to be looking at pivot tables, because obviously with raw data, yes, we can do little functions and analysis like we've done today, but if we're looking for a more detailed analysis and something quicker and a little bit more dynamic, that we are going to be looking at pivot tables to do that. We're going to be looking at pivot charts as well, because our dashboard is going to have charts on it, so we can easily visualize that data. And obviously we're going to look a little bit at formatting and how we can make that dashboard look nice, make it refresh and things like that when people look at it.